Oh, look, Star Trek, we have a Prime Day. And yes, it is a big deal. Today, episode 371 of Trekland, Tuesdays Live with me, Dr. Trekland Nemecek, coming to you here from the heart of Trekland through Portal 47 and even Trekland Treks, your customized away mission here in Southern California. Get in touch with me and we will set up your own four-stop amazing tour of location sites that you custom and design. Yes, you ready? You ready, TTLers, for a little bit of sanity, clarity, and the bigger picture in all things Star Trek? Happy Tuesday to everybody. These are interesting days when we're still waiting on the countdown till October 24th for fresh lower decks. Fresh Trek isn't as common as it used to be. And it's just as well because there's so much else going on in the world, and you know what I mean, here in the States and around the globe. But I first want to say welcome to everybody. Yes, it's Prime Day. What exactly does that mean? Well, I know what I think it means in Star Trek world. If you're watching us later on YouTube, hey, please like and subscribe right now and go ahead and leave a question, comment. I will circle back and get you even after the fact when we're archived, all right? And maybe you can join us sometime on a Tuesday live when we're at it here with the live crowd. Because there's a lot going on, even though it's a fallow time in Trek. And I don't mean a capital F fallow, like 2006 to 2017. I mean, it's a calm time right now. Gives us a little time to do a little further reaching and reflecting. But you know what? Something landed in my lap today, landed in your lap. Yes, it's Prime Day. And I thought, wow, we've got First Contact Day, we have Star Trek Day, and how blessed we are to have Prime Day. Because apparently Prime Day is the day that we celebrate all things about the Prime timeline in Star Trek, right? I mean, that's the way I took it. And that's a good thing. I mean, yes, I'm kidding. But think about it. It's almost ironic because the Prime timeline, the idea of this, which didn't exist until, of all things, ironically, the Kelvin universe. We didn't talk about this until then because the Kelvin universe, the alternate universe, needed a contrast with the real. Once it was decided to go to an alternate universe, and at the time it was kind of, well, why are we, it wasn't, I hate this. It was like, why are we wasting time? Everyone's getting older. We need to get back. But it was a weird compromise of sorts without pushing too many legal buttons and pushing the envelope about just letting a bunch of people play around with Star Trek so that it didn't really matter. And for all the guff that they took later, I want to thank Bob Orci and Alex Kurtzman for deciding that this would not be a reboot in the style of the times, but would be an alternate universe. So then they could do whatever the hell they wanted to do, and we don't have to care. You can if you want to, but we don't have to care in the bigger picture of Star Trek because in that script, there are two Spocks. There's Kelvin Spock that Zach Quinto plays, and there's Leonard Nimoy's Spock. And to distinguish them, they just came up with the idea of calling Nimoy's Spock Prime Spock. And in case you didn't know this, that's where the whole nomenclature of Prime Universe came from. Needing to call Nimoy's Spock something differently in the character list than Zach Quinto's Spock, Kelvin Spock. Yes. And from those script pages of a movie a lot of folks didn't really care for or thought there was no point to, although secretly there was a huge point to that movie. It just wasn't anything it was more to do with the business side than it was the franchise side. But they're the canon side. Let's just say this right now before we get tripped up in our terminology. The Kelvin universe is canon. It's Kelvin universe canon, just the same way that the Mirror universe is canon. It's Mirror universe canon. And there have been overlaps with the Prime and the Mirror universe. And there have been at least a couple of Prime and Kelvin universe interactions that we know of. The thing that sparked the whole splintering of the Kelvin timeline, for one, right? The interaction with the Kelvin. and Kirk's father, and yada yada. So yes, the Kelvin universe is canon unto itself. Is it internally consistent? The mirror universe is internally consistent unto itself. The Klingon War timeline that we saw playing out in Enterprise, in yesterday's Enterprise, is a universe unto itself, a splinter. And before we get too headachy, I'm just saying all that to say that that's the kind of when Mirror Mirror was written in 67, we just had the mirror universe and normal times. No one needed to label the prime universe the prime universe. It was just the not mirror. It's a lot the same way that we had telephones for years, and we didn't think we needed to call them corded phones until we had uncorded phones. And suddenly, oh, we have to draw the distinction. It's that kind of, we don't need the adjective until there's a contrast. Now, amazingly, all the years of original series, and yes, Next Gen and DS9 and Enterprise, we didn't know we needed to call the prime universe the prime universe until we got Prime Spock and those. But you know what? It's a handy device. It's great. It's wonderful. But it's not just that the prime universe exists as a contrast to all these alternate universes and splintered timelines. The prime universe is key to Star Trek as a whole, and it sneaked up on us and we didn't even realize it in another way. The prime timeline, or the concept that no, we don't reboot every so many years, even though the decades are piling up. That's kind of what's key to Star Trek versus everybody else. And we've talked about this before. I think the only exception, or the only fellow traveler this way, is Doctor Who. But Doctor Who has change baked into the cake. And even yet there's still a timeline of chronology. There's still Gallifrey, the Time Lords War. Hey, I'm not the huge Who fan, but I respect it enough to figure out that when I first finally sat down to look at it, I was amazed that there was a continuity to it. It earned my eternal respect. Now, I know they're playing with the timeline right now. My good friend James Kerwin, other Who fans are a little sometimes wrapped up in knots about what they're doing to it. I looked on sympathetically. Maybe it's in the middle of a fluxy time that will settle out again. And maybe we should all take notes on this. More on that in a second. I just want to make the point first that to me, after all these years and all these decades, first of surviving, first of not going away, and then of seeing other franchises rise to prominence after Star Trek kind of started the whole thing, not just as a franchise business and what that means, but the way fandom works, the way fandom is accepted in society. Okay? I just think Star Wars got bigger because they had better, more consistent toys. And kids could grow up with that for 30 years and be around wanting more. We had great toys for Star Trek too. We just didn't lean into it. Bless his heart, Gene was out there trying, boy howdy, to Lucas things the way it would be seen to be done later. For whatever the reasons, though. What's funny is we're kind of in a karmic turnaround now where Star Trek's had a huge catch-up. Still not to the numbers. There's the legacy numbers are out there. And you know, kids, I always say it's not a contest. We don't need that. That's why I get amused at the Trek versus Star Wars debates. Do those even still exist anymore? Because to me, usually when they're started up, they're either started, if not by Star Wars people, by third parties who are just wanting clickbait. That never starts with Star Trek. We've got 700, 800, 900 hours now of Trek to concern ourselves with, and more to come, and our own issues of canon, hopefully, not issues of gatekeeping, etc. The positive things to have a fandom, to have a hobby with, to nerd out about. And that's thanks to this notion that we do have a greater continuity. And yes, it's been abused at times over the years, not just lately, but back over the years. It's taken twists and turns, and every new iteration causes a spectrum, right, of anxiety. They're going to mess up the new thing. Anxiety to fear, and sometimes even anger, whether it's the animated series even, Whether it's Fred Freiberger coming to produce the third season after the big letter writing campaign, and the Spock fans really getting in a twist about the way Spock's portrayed. Well, the third season doesn't exist for me. I don't accept the third season. Yes, look it up. Every new iteration, motion picture, the next generation, right? DS9, Voyager, all the way down the line. You can find some people in various degrees who were so in love with Star Trek, and it was such a part of their life that they became protective / anxious / fearful / angry if they perceive something going wrong. And of course, the years go by and the great whole merges together. People do whatever they need to do to retcon it. A lot of those retconners and gap fillers and canon smoothers oftentimes wind up professionally within the franchise and do all of that themselves. Looking at you, Mike Sussman Manicoto, finally explaining the Klingon forehead ridges. And if it's a little bit wonky to get there, that's what it took, but it was done. All things in good time. All things in good time. But that's what sets Star Trek apart from everything else. And yes, we've had some doozies thrown at us lately, especially in visual canon. I'm still hopeful that as time goes by, even those things too will be smooth. I know you're saying, how are they going to do that? How are we going to reconcile all these Enterprise hulls? Let's just see what happens. Let's just see what happens in the bigger picture. Really, kids, what I'm waiting for is another 50-something years, and we do get an experimental warp drive. And whatever we say about World War III or the eugenics wars, whatever, we come to the bottom line realization that having a device that allows us through subspace or whatever, having a device that allows us to go faster than the speed of light and start to conquer some of these vast stellar distances in a way that we can handle within a human lifespan, it may come down to the fact that, I hate to break it to you, it has nothing to do with matter and antimatter reactions and funneling that resultant radiation plasma through a dilithium matrix. And the fact that dilithium exists. Now, whether it's going to be found when it's found in crystalline form and has an exact matrix, exact makeup that does something to warp plasma that allows, when run through warp field coils, to create a subspace bubble. All of that carefully thought out and evolved machinery process may have nothing to do with it when we finally do get to a hyperlight drive. But for now, if by then Star Trek is 100 years old or 150, A, I'll be celebrating, and B, it's just fine. It's just fine. You know, devices in the past, what was it, Cavorite? What was it? At times over the years, early sci-fi came up with devices to do that. That just not all of them were 60-year franchises and counting that had millions of people around the world devoted to all of this. And yes, eventually it won't be the facts themselves. It'll be the devotion to not giving up on that. Because here's the thing, kids, something disturbed me the last 5 years or so. What is this thing with World War III now? I mean, we had enough clues because World War III was danced around. The worst egregious one was the belief that Gene had always said, we survived because Earth avoided World War III. And then right there in Patterns of Force, there's one or two references across the original series to your Third World War, to which, for a while, some of us canon smoothers, I'm looking at you, Jeff Mandel, and your team in the 70s and 80s, came up with lowercase your Third World War, or your Third World War, meaning it was the undeveloped. And then, yes, Jeff Cox did a wonderful multi-novel series where the eugenics war was in 1992 to 96. I mean, I missed it, didn't you? But that's because it was like a secret underground war that was not fought above ground and in the with tanks and planes and armies and visible traditional war. It wasn't a terrorist war. It was just completely. It was like the best case James Bond, Julian Bashir secret agent war. all kept from human guys. Well, that was an explanation. I understand the idea we've got to update this. But what I'm saying is I go back around in the 90s as the Berman bubble was growing bigger and bigger. There were mentions, A Matter of Time talks about the nuclear winter of the mid-century. We finally have Zephyr Cochrane and the Phoenix in the wreckage in Bozeman, Montana, in the wreckage of what passes for scientific exploration in 2261, in that era. Now, what gets me is apparently at the end of Enterprise on a VIO screen, and if I'm in the weeds here, kids, this is what you get when you enter Trekland. The bio screen that we see briefly that all of the canon nerds nerded out on had a timeline in Prime Archer's timeline that Mirror Archer is scoping out. And there is a date, all the things we know about, taken right out of the chronology that the Okudas had compiled, the timeline that we'd all pretty much coalesced around. And for some reason, there is World War III beginning in 2025. Say what? That's next year. Now, this was in 2005. So in 20 years, what happened to the whole part about we need to find out some way to kick the can down the road? Now, Akiva Goldsman, in writing Strange New World, the pilot, they have the eugenics war just kind of morphing into World War III after having been morphed from a second civil war in the U.S. because at the time, January 6th was so present. And our politics of the moment seemed so intractable. And that was very hot and current and timely. And a lot of people were shocked that Strange New World went there in its pilot right out of the gate, making an impact. Now, aside from, there have been 2 or 3 really wonderful episodes, especially dealing with civil rights and corollaries in the best old Star Trek tradition, metaphors and allegories. But other than that, Strange New Worlds has not really leaned into topical issues as a parallel since then, which is kind of interesting. They made a big splash at the beginning and then not so much since. Now, what's going on with that? Akiva will just kind of roughly say, well, with all the temporal incursions over the years, it's time to drop the joke that the eugenics wars happened in the 90s. Let's find a Star Trek way to do. So apparently, we're updating that. One of the hallmarks for me of having a canon, having a prime timeline, is the fact that we have our known knowns and we can build on them. And then we have the rules, and then we need to break them. We can do that. And this is feeling like we're in the middle of a wholesale breakage here. Now, I know for a lot of you, this is not what Star Trek is about. So you can leave the room right now. No, like I said, the ever since the Okuda's chronology here, and now look at it in their 2016 encyclopedia, the update, World War III began, the Nuki World War III began in 2053. That gives 10 years until Zephyr Cochrane's image of the Earth that we see in First Contact. That gives time for there to have been a conflict that started a nuclear winter and yet was far enough removed for things to calm down a little bit. Although we know there's this thing called half-life and radioisotopes, and it's still detectable in the atmosphere per data in the scanners in First Contact when they approach 2063 through the temporal vortex and try to date where the hell they are. What I'm getting at here is to say, and some people are being misguided on this now, so I don't know what we're going to do. But there's no way that the nukes start in 2025. Okay? Because once you start a nuclear war, you don't go on for 30 years. Nuclear wars are going to be short exchanges unless there's some bizarre technical or tactical evolution that we're not for sure about. It's just not going to happen. So we've got a confusion factor right now. I see people say, well, World War III starts in 2025, according to the on-screen timeline. That might be a reference to an underground beginning of the eugenics wars. Everything is being kicked down the line because the temporal incursions messing, shifting time streams. Okay, that's a short-term answer to trying to make a real world dilemma. The eugenics wars couldn't have happened in the 90s, 1992, 1996, precisely, with the Botany Bay launching in 1996. And oh my God, don't give me, didn't Picard puts a toe into it with the Project Con. And now we've got Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow on Strange New Worlds in an alternate timeline that kicks the Con timeline down the road. It's giving me a headache. What's happening right now is we've got a lot of loose threads, and right under our nose, the established timeline's been dynamited. What is Prime anymore? Are we not Prime anymore? Is Star Trek not in Prime anymore? And I know a lot of you are going to say, well, Discovery and Strange News never been in Prime. Let's move past that. I was kidding about it in the beginning. But right now, we're in a fluxy time when these things have not been hashed out by the writers or even by canon smoothing folks on the sidelines, trying to make sense of it all once the dust dies down and we have a static picture that we can move the pieces around until they fit. We're in the middle of this. And while Star Trek is moving ahead, there are some of us that lay awake at night worrying about this. Not really. I want to say that my final baseline explanation for something, just like the alpha beta quadrant line being wrong on one graphic in Discovery by an artist that apparently thought he would just make the thing more balanced, not worry about scientific accuracy. I just chalk that misplaced boundary line up to a display glitch. I know, but sometimes it's all you got, and that's what you take. And my official headcanon is that this 2025 display screen crossing over interdimensional lines to the mirror universe and back, I'm going to say that that's a glitch, that it's not 2025, it should have been 2055. Because we're not starting this next year. What was the point of kicking it down the road 20 years? That's not far enough. It was kind of pointless. And it was pointless to start Strange New Worlds 3 or 4 years ago to only kick it down the road 5 years. That's kind of pointless. So let's just say, if we want to say that there's a eugenics wars to come, if you want to call what's happening right now a second civil war, but it's a limited, I don't know that makes sense to flow them in. And what were the points of the eugenics war? And Colonel Green was supposedly part of this eugenics war, or there's a lot of fine points here that are out there floating. So yes, on Prime Day, I want to highlight that we've got a major issue up in the air right now. It's in flux. And fortunately, we've got current Star Trek that's happening, that at least I'm hoping by the end of the run, some fans turned pros will tackle this the same way Mike and Manny finally tackled the Klingon head ridges. A lot of things in Star Trek get settled that way. Things that are done by those who weren't aware that anyone would care in 30 years, or weren't aware, period, eventually find a way to be handled. And I'm hoping that's what's going to happen with the timeline, whatever we call it, the Prime 2, I don't know, the Prime. What are we going to do? How are we going to distinguish if the temporal incursions over time have shifted events forward just to cover our butts living here in reality? If that happens, that's fine. I would just look forward to the time when it's finally settled. But just to point out that it is in flux right now. It is unsettled. There are things that make no sense. 2025 and such are not the mid 21st century. And the preponderance of clues and evidence all point to that World War III being in the 2250s. So no, fan fiction writers and others concerned about this, We don't have to see bombs falling in 2025 to have World War III, yada, yada. And I still like the idea of an underground-ish war anyway, with fragmentary records. Are the fragmentary records times to come? Is Project Con in the 2020s pushing that all back way far? Are we about to get we don't know. We don't know. It's ahead of us. I just raise all these issues to say that, yes, we've got where we are here so far because of the continuity of Trek, because folks said that's the strength of this show. It's not rebooting. It's in the shared universe that makes people want to be invested. In the beginning, it was just because it was sci-fi, and who's going to think sci-fi is worth following? But over years, it became its own creature, its own stability, its own story generator. And thank God, along the way, we had folks in positions to keep that going in an insanely detailed way. Looking at you, Mike and Denise, and Rick, and Mike and Manny, and Ron, and Ira, everybody up and down the line. Visual effects, art department, writers, so many of you at important points the way, keeping that going. And sometimes if someone let things stray a little bit, somebody later on could pull it back. So yes, there's a little bit of unsettlement in the Prime Universe timeline, but nothing we can't fix as long as we're aware of it. And we're aware that's where we are right now. And somebody at some point is going to land that sucker. Maybe it'll be about the time we figure out that we got to massage this whole dilithium and matter antimatter thing when we're really putting up real world time warp ships. Maybe by then. But having said all of that, yeah, the Prime timeline, a continuous timeline, even with its bumps and hiccups, that is what makes Star Trek special, on top of all the other aspirational, inspiring, futuristic, geeky tech franchises and storytelling vehicles out there. That's what is the cherry on top. As much as the canonistas get made fun of, that's what sets Star Trek aside from the others. I mean, yes, you can find your aspirational, diverse, future-leaning stories. I hear you can even do that in the Marvel universe. I don't know how, when everybody's running around in funky capes. But I hear that even inspires some folks. Power to them. I know what, after all these years, has finally evolved in my thinking as to what sets Star Trek aside. And what sparked this entire crazy media fandom world that so many people are invested in. And so many people manage to find their inspiration and sometimes their life-affirming sanity in the midst of an insane world from Star Trek. So, yes, indeed. Happy Prime Day to you, Star Trek. Hey, everybody. I wanted to get that off my chest. It struck me funny. I was wondering what to do this week. And there we go. Of course, we should celebrate Prime Day. And don't you tell me it means anything else. A thank you to all the folks involved who are, they are here with our Patreon, our TTLers, right? So I just want to thank, as I do every week, our TTLers, Chuck A., James Kerwin, Diana Hopkins, Jesse at Crusher Convo Podcast, Lawrence Todd, Helbert Gunn Johnson, Glenda Bruton, Andrew Dzimski, Josh Patton, Pranakasha Productions, Chris Jiggins, Keith Rombach, and Comedy Forecast. And our live wires, the TTL live wires, Rob McLean, Byron Bailey, J.R. Poole, Alan Hoenzi, James, Dave Gregory, Greg Wickstrom, and Casey Shafsky. Yes, it's a simple Patreon, $5, $10 a month. You can go over. We have just restarted the new month. Thank you for everybody who's in already. Maybe you should think about this too. $5, $10 for a shout out, $10 for access to the early years of behind the scenes interviews from Portal 47. Patreon.com Facebook.com/Trekland Live. I invite you to come over. Thank you so much for that support. And the Trek Files is up. It's a new Tuesday. It certainly is. What is the deal this week? We've got a new episode up, gang. It's looping in Star Trek. Yes, it's 1975. We are talking to the this week on the Trek Files. It's Mike Medicino, who worked on the upgrades, the 2002 and the 2022 upgrades to the motion picture, finally making the movie the way Robert Wise intended it. The audio side, we've got a memo about the relooping session. We talk about the whole sound industry. Sound is coming out in the forefront, at least across Trekland. You're seeing bits and pieces of it here and there. I'm glad to have Mike, known for years, talk about this memo from '79 about the actors doing relooping of their dialogue. Anyway, it's a great look at the industry. It's a great look at this niche of production. It's a great look at 1979 in the motion picture. And you want to be there with us, the Trek File, where all podcasts are obtained. But if you want the document of the week and the audio player and the hot links right back to Memory Alpha, look at our new combo site, thetrekfiles.com. Takes you to our Memory Alpha page, which now is completely searchable for all 12 seasons so far of the Trek Files. Love to have you take a look at that, as always. And as always, it's a Tuesday and it's up there. And as always, you can find me on Twitter/X. I'm still there. Thank you so much. YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. It's all Larry Nemecek's Trekland. Please, on YouTube, like and subscribe if you haven't already. Portal47.net. You can go read about Portal 47. I did want to mention something else. As you know, we talk about how things are a little fallow right now with Trek. Lower Decks is coming back the 24th. I just want to point you over to a nonpartisan election group called Trek the Vote for Fair Elections. Different than the Trek the Vote event that happened a few weeks ago. There have been 3 Trek actors and behind-the-scenes folks involved with campaign-related activities that were partisan for Harris Waltz. This is a nonpartisan group, grassroots movement of Star Trek fans volunteering with nonpartisan pro-democracy groups nationwide. If you go to trekthe.vote, there's a whole litany of webinars and things going on. There is an information session. There is a postcard writing Discord party to benefit the Center for Common Ground. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Poll monitor training, voter outreach, phone banking, just to get people to the poll, supporting people with transportation. You should go check it out. But it's a weird URL, trekthe.vote. Okay? The interim chair this year is Heather Barker. You may know her from Fandom 2. That's something I wanted to make sure and pass along to you today, gang, because, yeah. It's that time of year. It's that time of time. It's time to reflect. I don't know. What are the prime reasons you're a Star Trek fan, huh? Just want to say today, hey, stay woke. Check the sources. Stay healthy. Do all the things. And Trek well, everybody.